Hi, you're doing things wrong. In almost every single Fusion tutorial I've ever watched, the method used to change the frame size is needlessly slow, convoluted, and messy. I'm going to teach you a way that's faster and more efficient, and at the same time, you'll learn something that is vital to understanding what you're doing in your Fusion comps. The way that's most often recommended is to merge your media over top a transparent background node. Now this absolutely works, and I understand why you'd want to teach Fusion in this way. To a lot of people, myself included, node-based image processing is a very unintuitive thing to understand at first. So, reinforcing that you need to merge things in order to see them in your composition is very important. That being said, watch what happens when I play it back using this method. You can see here the playback is extremely slow even with just the one video in my composition. Now I want to say this is an exaggeration. This is a 4K clip, I'm changing the frame size to 8K, my graphics card is a 3070, it only has 8 gigs of VRAM. Of course there's going to be issues there. That being said, as you can imagine, this is only going to compound upon itself as your composition gets more complex. Now, let's take a look at my preferred technique. You can see here that we get between 2 and 10 extra frames per second while achieving the same exact effect. Why is that? Well, for one, mine isn't actually rendering at 8K. How can that be? It says 7680 by 4320 right there. Well, what you see isn't always what you get. Although the frames are both in 8K, if we take a look under the hood. Bam! See that dotted outline right there? Well, that's what we in the biz call the domain of definition. It's not nearly as cool as it sounds, but it's still pretty cool. Why would you waste computational hours rendering pixels that aren't even being used? Well, you wouldn't, and that's why domain of definition exists. So what Fusion does is instead of rendering everything within the frame, it picks 2 points, draws a rectangle, and it renders everything within that rectangle. The secret sauce I've glazed my solution with is the fact that it respects your original image's domain of definition. Fusion is smart. It'll automatically add to the domain of definition when it needs information outside of the current domain. It's not that smart though, so when you feed it a background with all zeros as its colors, it thinks it needs to add the domain of the background as well, therefore increasing the resolution unnecessarily and slowing down your compositions. Now that we're done with the nerd stuff, here's how to fix it. The first and possibly most important step is to summon your snail. Look at him. Adorable little guy. But I kind of want to put him in an endless void. So you're going to grab your snail, smash shift and spacebar, and bring in your new best friend, the crop node. Now you might look at this and go, what is all this mumbo jumbo? I don't understand it and am scared. Well, to that I say never fear, my soft-headed friend. It's actually pretty simple. The X and Y offsets move your image around in the frame, but invert it. It behaves a lot like anchor points in After Effects or HipFill. It defines where the center should be relative to the image. Below that, the X and Y sizes set the output frame size. Duh. Beyond this, it gets a little more interesting. The Keep Aspect checkbox lets you adjust the X or Y sizes while maintaining the aspect ratio of the image. Keep Center does exactly what it says, keeping your image centered as you adjust the X and Y sizes. We'll use that to maintain feature parity with the merge technique. There's also Change Pixel Aspect. I wouldn't recommend touching this unless you know exactly what you're doing, but basically what it's doing is changing the aspect ratio on a per pixel level. The last setting is Clipping Mode. This has to do with the domain of definition that I mentioned before, and it's actually fairly intuitive once you understand what's going on. Using domain of definition allows Fusion to put information outside of the frame. This can be a good or bad thing depending on what you're doing. So, setting clipping mode to frame will cut it off at the edges of the frame, setting it to none will leave the domain of definition untouched. To match the merge technique, click the Keep Centered box and set the clipping mode to none. That's it. Now set whatever custom resolution you want and you're off to the races. If you want to move it around, simply put a transform node right before the crop node, and now you have full control along with the node graph that's actually readable. Imagine that. If you want a better understanding of domain of definition, I'll link to VFX Study's excellent explainer video on it in the card that's covering my forehead and in the description down below. If that's all you came here for, have a nice day, but I have a few extra tidbits to share if you want to stick around. You've probably seen that clipping mode checkbox in more places than just the crop node. One of the more prominent examples is blur. It has 3 options instead of 2, but why? Well, in this case, you aren't just having an impact on the output domain. You're actually changing what the effect is doing to the pixels of your image. In order to understand what the difference is, you'll have to understand how blurs work in the first place. Let's take a look at the Gaussian blur, since it's probably what you have most experience using. It's kind of become the default blur for all digital art of all varieties. The Gaussian blur is based on Gaussian distribution, which is that line that people draw on Plinko machines. It's a math thing named after a German dude that has something to do with probability. I'm not a statistician, but what you need to know is that it's used to define a weight matrix that averages together the surrounding pixels to create that muddy blur that we all know and love. There's a fantastic video by Computerphile that explains and visualizes this way better than I ever could, but basically what a blur does is it takes a look at the surrounding pixels with a search radius defined by a kernel, and then takes a weighted average of those, and that is the final output. But what happens to the pixels at the edge of the frame or domain? The kernel would inevitably spill over the edges. Well, this is what clipping mode changes. Set it to none and the blur will continue on into emptiness for as long as it needs, depending on your chosen blur size. It takes the average of pixels outside of the frame or domain, and since those pixels are transparent, the end result is that it feathers out the edges. Domain and frame cut off or clamp the blur at the edge of their respective namesakes. Keep in mind though that in this case, clamping means the blur will get less severe as you go towards the edges. What Fusion is doing is it's shrinking the kernel size as it needs in order to avoid referencing pixels outside of the domain or frame. This is an aside, but I'm so fucking glad I switched to Fusion. I used to use HitFilm, and not only was it a slow, buggy mess that crashed my graphics driver every time I tried to use it, but anytime you had to blur something that you shrunk down, say you had like a 128 by 128 image, what you had to do was pre-comp that just to get the blur to reference pixels outside of the edges. In Fusion, there's a checkbox for that. No pre-comp needed. Thank God. Also, I kind of want to do a video comparing HitFilm to DaVinci Resolve and Fusion, since they got bought out by Artlist and had a massive revamp. Let me know if that's something you'd be interested in. Anyway, that's all I got for now. If you learned something, maybe swing around next time. I'm going to be explaining how the alpha channel works and how to get the missing ad blend mode in Fusion. Last thing, this channel hit 100 subscribers, and I'm really proud of that. That is 2 public school classrooms full of people that decided to click the red button. If you are one of those people and you are watching, thank you. I really appreciate it.